fast track innovation and growth. We are going to be talking about integrating workloads and, of course, very importantly, cost optimization and reduction of technical debt. Joining me today are Vivek Subramaniam. He is the industry principal architect manufacturing from Google Cloud India. Vivek, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, we've got Sundar Belapur. He's the customer engineering manager of Google Cloud in India. Hi, Sundar.
Yes, Amit. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Nice having you. And we've got Rajesh Shewani. He's the head of customer engineering at Google Cloud India. Rajesh, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, I was on mute. Hi, Shamik. Good to be here. Nice to see you again.
Sure. And of course, we've got Abdul Munim. He's the co-founder and director of Brio Technologies. Abdul, great having you with us, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning, everyone. Pleasure being here. Looking forward to a valuable session.
Absolutely, Abdul. All right, now, Vivek, if you can tell us a little bit about all of these points that we're going to be talking, especially with respect to manufacturing industry, supply chain optimization, and tell us, some of the challenges. Where is the space heading? What are your observations? What are some of the challenges that we can be encountering, and what are some of the best practices manufacturers would have to keep in mind? Over to you.
Sure. So, and let me do that through a slide and maybe a demo. And also, given the topic of just the conversations in terms of how you think of it from a multi-cloud standpoint, probably also I'll bring that flavor in terms of how should one think about it, right?
Okay.
The way I will do that, and I'm hopeful that everyone can see my screen at this point.
We can.
Perfect. So the way I will do that is essentially first I'd like to just spend some time in terms of talking about um, where are we as an industry in terms of in terms of adoption, right? And what is work well, what does not work well, and of course there's this entire hype around AI. What does it mean, right? So that's one part of it, and therefore, what are the implications from a tech standpoint, right? Is there a need for you to think about how you want to approach platforms and how you might want to capitalize on the most of technology? Okay, so we'll use a flow and go with demos. But look, I think this is beaten up. This is beaten to death in some sense. Enough analysts out there. Everyone's talking about how AI is going to, unlock productivity and obviously drive significant top line and bottom line growth for organizations, right? But if you take that aside for a while and you look at Industry 4.2, and of course AI in manufacturing, the core of it is obviously initiatives in Industry 4. I think some facts and some reality checks, right? Look, a lot of organizations for the last few years, 18, 24 months, have experimented, done pilots, figured out what works for them, what use cases to prioritize, been very successful in certain pilots, right? But as organizations move out of this pilot phase, people's ambition has grown. They want to do a lot bigger. They want to scale it across multiple industries. That's um, uh, one reality of where we are. The second, I think people who are just getting out of the pilot have started realizing that while it is easy to solve for pilot sites with over investment in terms of resources and technology, how do you really scale it beyond your single line across the plant, across multiple plants, so on and so forth? And therein lies the challenge of connectivity and data standardization for accelerating use cases. So the second thing that a lot of people are realizing. The third is again AI is everywhere. Generative AI is even more so. I mean, in the last 1 year and a half, the number of executive conversations we've had on this topic has been phenomenal. But the fact is, people are still piloting. They're trying to learn. They're trying to put it to use, right? The new dimension that's probably come in is sustainability, and that's a metric that everyone's looking at as well. So that's just an additional flavor. And when I'm talking about Gen AI again, if AI as a space is exciting, Gen AI is even more so. The last few months has just been about multiple models coming out, which seem to outbeat each other in terms of capabilities. And initially, when we started last year, while it was a lot about creativity use case and text-based use case, now we're talking about multimodal models and as well agentic workflows, which are fairly powerful. Yeah. And to top it all up, um, people have skill issues, right? There are only so many data scientists to go around or data analysts to go around. So how do you really solve for all these challenges, leverage technology to be able to bring this to now? With all of those constraints, right, that you are facing or you will face once you go through maturity journey, the question is there an implication on your current platform, right? And can you go ahead with your infra platform that you've been using to optimize your infra cost fee? And is there something you need to look at it differently, right? And as opposed to telling you the answer of if it's a yes or no, let me kind of show you where we see the industry heading, right? And this is in the construct of agents. What people really, really care about is three questions in operations, right? They want to know what's going wrong, they want to know why things are going wrong, and they want to know how to fix things when they're going wrong. And all that we have done in the last few years of technology is we've been trying to answer these questions for a person. So let me show this through, again, this is a manufacturing GenAI agent which we've created. Think of the scenario as the person being part of operations, being an operations persona, and they need to answer the question of the what, the why, and the how. Right? So let's the what. Now, this is a question that everyone wants to know. Look, I have a couple of plants. What's going wrong with plant P1 and P2? Right? If a human were to answer this question, how would they do that? They would essentially, one, they would say, look, going wrong, I would need to look at a set of KPIs. From those KPIs, I would need to essentially look at what the actual values are and therefore what the threshold values are. Right? While I get the KPIs, I obviously want it to be from a single source of truth, or I need to make sure it's clean data. So I need to be able to bring this data out. Right? Now, what I essentially walk through, and as you can see, it's going through its entire process. What I essentially walk through in terms of the thought process is how we have tuned our Gemini model, right? And this is important because as you experiment with generative AI, you want to stay in that experimentation phase and therefore keep cost as minimal as possible. And the ability to prompt tune, and because of the millions of tokens we have, the ability to stay in that range is much higher. But the point is, what I explained is exactly how the agent has now responded, right? It's essentially pulling out all the KPIs of plant P1 from BigQuery. Similarly, the threshold values from BigQuery. It's comparing the threshold for plant P1 along with the KPIs, and the same exercise is done for plant P2. And once all of this data is there, there is certain steps that we're taking to represent it in a certain manner, right?
Okay.
So as you saw, everything was being done real time. Out here, you see that yes, you have OE which is off, FPYC is off for plant P1, plant P2 looks good, and there is certain sort of commentary around it, the sources in terms of the database, and then there is visualization around it. But that's one part of the question, right? In terms of what's going wrong. The tougher question is, hey, why are things going wrong, and more importantly, how do I fix it when they go wrong? Now, why is it a tough question? The reason it's tough is because if a person had to answer this, obviously the person would know that, look, if I have to find out OE at a plant level, the root cause is going to be at a line level or at a machine level. So I need to first identify the poorest performing machines. Second, once I understand the poorest performing machines, I need to therefore then understand the reason for why the machines are down, the root cause analysis, if you will, right? Once I essentially understand the issue as to why the machine is down, I need to then therefore understand how to fix it. Okay, all of this is essentially information that is going to be there in data warehouse, right? Especially the root cause analysis, performance of OE, so on and so forth. And is going to be information present in documents, right? In terms of best practices to fix. And once for it's identified those root causes, it's essentially identified how to improve, right? And it is given specific steps. And if you can see this reference out here, it is essentially stating where it is coming from. In this case, we have pre-uploaded a manufacturing manual, which kind of has a root cause to stepwise instruction, right? And of course, there's certain visualization if the person is interested. So if you kind of reflect on what we saw was essentially the ability to so what we saw was essentially the ability to go from an issue identification to issue resolution in the shortest possible time, right? And of course, it's not magic where there's a beautiful chatbot that's available, and that'll never be available because what you're trying to solve for is in the context of your data and in the context of your processes, which is how do I fix things. And to be able to, you know, do something like this, right, which reduces the time from issue to resolution, you need a whole host of things, right? The first thing, you obviously want best in class Gen AI capabilities, right? As again, there are multiple agents around this. There is a master agent. In this case, you have trained it on application context. We've built the reasoning engine through prompt engineering. In this case, obviously, you can fine tune it as well, and the ability to orchestrate, right, which is basically the ability of a master agent to call sub agents, right? Think of sub agents as smaller agents that are very purpose built. So a data agent is just focused on understanding and realizing the kind of question, understanding where the data is in terms of BigQuery, and pulling information. The document agent, essentially making sure that once you know that it is a data set that you have to get from a set of documents, using the Vertex Enterprise Search capabilities. The reformulation agent, the commerce agent, is basically taking all of that information that a data agent might spit out, a document agent might spit out, and providing it as a paragraph or a set of graphs, right? To do all of this, right, you start with a base Gemini, and Gemini has its own advantages from being multimodal. So essentially, you can process not only text, database information, but also images and videos if you want to do. So think the ability to do a Gemba walk enabled through a Gemini agent. Right? The second is the context size. From a context size standpoint, think the ability to just stay in the realm of prompt tuning, ensuring you are able to get your reasoning perfect in terms of the what, why, and how, and being able to deliver value and ROI without having to go through fine tuning, which obviously increases your infrastructure cost to a few hundred Ks, if anything, right? The third is the orchestration. So this overall framework that allows you to have multiple agents interacting with each other and other parts to it, right? That is base capability now to be able to do features like this, right? The second is the ability to obviously have data, right? And the right kind of data. Now, the challenge with manufacturing data is the fact that it is complex to acquire, right? And in Google Cloud, we've essentially, and that's what we do well, right? Be it OT data, be it SAP data, or be it even maybe outside data, right? Which Google is able to provide through its Google Earth satellite imagery or Google Maps ecosystem. The ability to get data inside your organization, inside your machine, and maybe outside your organization in the most simple and distilled way. And that's something that we worked on. So to give you an example, in universal OT connectivity, we support 250 plus protocols. That means irrespective of the make, model, vintage of your factory, of your machines in the factory, you're able to bring in connectivity. When it comes to P, we have pre-created and pre-populated a layer which allows you to essentially pull out information. It could be with inventory management, it could be with payables. We have created basis the flow and the normalized data sets that's required. Right? When it comes to geospatial imagery, right, you might want to understand weather and the impact weather has on your supply chain from a control tower standpoint, or it could be any industry. So we provide that universal connectivity layer in some sense, which is shown out here, and bring it onto our enterprise data warehouse, which is BigQuery. Now, the beauty of BigQuery is it works very well with large data sets and it optimizes TCO for large data sets. And again, as you move away from your pilots, and let's assume you're going from a line with 10 machines to now 10 lines with 100 machines, and then obviously, I mean, it compounds, right, as a problem. And the amount of, how do you ensure you're able to store data in the most optimal manner and only pay for what you either store and consume? And this is where BigQuery's inherent engineered feature of having storage and compute as two separate layers, and the pricing for it being separate, ensures that you're not paying upfront for a t-shirt size data warehouse which you think you might need from a compute standpoint, right? Therefore, again, across each of these layers, to be able to focus on business outcomes, right, and not necessarily focus on the plumbing issues, is what you would need to get to the future that I showed you in terms of manufacturing agents. Now, of course, what I showed was one part of the use case, right? Where we seeing the North Star for most manufacturing companies is this reference architecture, right, or this logical architecture. We see individual functions obviously wanting to optimize using data and AI for their specific needs, be it quality, asset performance, or person who's responsible for content delivery, or inventory, or so on and so forth. Right? So you need either ISVs, either SaaS solution providers, or the ability to build your own intelligence across the scale. That's one part. The second is, you might want to, like, obviously have need ensure that you have the last mile digitization covered, and one can do that to no code and no code applications. So that's the second. The third is, you need strong foundations from a data standpoint, which is the universal data file platform which is spoken. And finally, the universal OT connect. And of course, on top of it, as we move towards more a language-based interface where we can solve for the what, why, and how, you will essentially see a lot more chat-based interfaces or voice-based interfaces. And of course, the ability to kind of understand what is happening, why it's happening, and how it's happening, how to fix it across various functions. The ability to even go further and say that, look, if this is a scenario, a what if in terms of what is the next best action, right? And the ability to do it across a single plant and the various hierarchy levels in that plant, or outside the single plant and across multiple plants. Now, if you have to do all of this, then it goes back to the question, right? From a platform standpoint, do you want to think of it differently as beyond just an infrastructure platform? Or should you be asking the question of ensuring you have the right IoT platform and the right, and I've kind of detailed out the right platform and what it means from a characteristic standpoint in 2 and 3, the right data platform and the right AI platform, right? That's one question. What is the right IoT platform? In our minds, it's not only connectivity. Connectivity is table stakes. Of course, you want to spend as low as time on your instrumentation engineers writing custom code to pull out data. The second is normalization of the data so it is useful in the ISA 95 hierarchy, right? There is again the construct of UNSs and data fabrics, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it is about data normalization and making data useful. The third, and I think oftentimes, sometimes, which is an oversight from us as technology teams, is the analytics and Gemba analytics, right? The person who knows the asset the most is the person on the shop floor. Okay. So how do you essentially provide this person self-serve tools that they can write their own analytics, right? And I think that is a strong consideration that everyone should have. The second thing is, look, you know, in the initial part of Industry 4.0, we said, look, everything has to come to the cloud, train on cloud, inferencing on cloud. But if you're talking about remote sites, and if the latency and sensitivity of decision needs to be made on the site, then how do you think of training on cloud, running on edge? So irrespective of there's a disruption or there's a real-time need, we can pass it on to the edge. Right? Those should be the starting points of your IoT plan. Similarly, on your data and AI platform, TCOs look great for the first 6 9 months while you're in pilot, but what we've noticed is once you start taking the 12-month period and once streams of data start coming in, TCO is going to be an issue, will be an issue, right? So how do you think at scale and what is the cost, and ensure the cost of data storage right? And the data use is minimized to ensure your ROI still look attractive. Right? The
Right.
third is any platform should have predictive capabilities. I think table stakes should have also generative AI capabilities. And when we are talking generative AI, it should be, I think, inherently multimodal. So it can handle a set of use cases. It should reduce your TCO by offering the large context windows so you don't have to essentially fine tune your model every time there's an issue. And at least while you're in the POC stage, you can stick to content, right? And the third is, of course, the ability to create documents as needed. Okay. The final piece is, and again, how do we address the skill gap? Because you can have all of this, but there'll be only so many resources we can invest in from a team standpoint. So think, how do you not necessarily have to manage the IT infra and plumbing, but are there ways to make it serverless managed service offerings as far as possible on your IoT platforms, on your data ingestion platforms, on your data warehouse platforms, which therefore allow you to invest teams not only in IT infrastructure management but also AI, right? Where the value is. If Similarly, there are only so many good AI ML engineers out there. So how do you leverage capabilities that are present in today's platform, such as Auto ML, that allows you to build multiple models at scale, right? I think those are a few consideration points that I would leave consider in terms of where Industry 4.0 is going, how to take the most value from AI, and what it means for you, and why perhaps multi-cloud is the way to go. And finally, of course, like a few tactical points. Always start with your incident vision. It's not about the technology. Ensure you have your buy-in into process leaders. And once you have your vision, once you have your use cases, and once you have your benefit, question likely if an infra-focused cloud is what you need, or is there something additional you need, right? And of course, if you want to have a conversation with us, either during the webinar or outside, do reach out to one of us. We're more than happy to kind of walk through this conversation.
Okay.
I come to a close of my presentation. Happy to either take questions now or maybe move forward and then we can come back.
Sure. We're going to have, we're going to move into a question answer session, but thanks for, giving us that wonderful presentation, Vivek. I think some great takeaways was, number one, the boss is always going to ask you, what's going wrong with, plan A versus plan B. I mean, that's a high level question. And, it's easy to answer the what's going wrong. You just analyze the KPIs, you stack them against an established benchmark. But then you've actually started figuring out the why. I think that's the real multi-million dollar question now. So it's beginning to answer the why. At what point, Vivek, at what point do you reckon GenAI models can independently start taking real-time decisions? Is that the next leg in the journey?
I think that leg is far away, to be
Okay.
honest. The think the right way to look at this is through the lens of time. I think should while Genix is one tool in the kit, it's not the only tool, right? So I think the point is understand what your end goal is for the function. It could be a remote operations center which requires minimal amount of human touch, or it could be the construct of the lighthouse factory that a lot of people are talking about, or it could be a complementary facility, and then figure out how it AI and Gen AI are part of it. I think where we are with technology is there is still some way to go for people to have confidence that this will always do the right thing. So think of it as a decision aid system for now. And once there is confidence and the risk of error is so low that you really don't have to worry about it. Because look, humans make mistakes all the time as well, right? It's not like we are 100% right. So
True.
as the error rates and the implications of a low error rate don't of an error are not consequential, then you could move towards the direction. But still some time to go.
Understood. Understood. All right, Vivek, thanks for establishing that. Let me welcome the other gentlemen on the panel right now for a quick Q&A session. Gentlemen, we saw what's the intent of AI and Gen AI in manufacturing companies, what it can accomplish, and what are the things that lie ahead. What are the next challenges that industries would have to solve? So at this point, let's try and establish what is it that cloud infra, especially multi-cloud, what it brings into this equation, and how can it actually catalyze this journey for manufacturing companies. Let me start with you, Rajesh. Now, Rajesh, you specialize in information and analytics architecture. You've been working with a lot of companies with their, with your solutions. Um, if you could tell us, you've heard the points that Vivek had established for us when it comes to AI, Gen AI. How do you align? How do you see the role of multi-cloud? Is there really value in multi-cloud environments? And also, can a multi-cloud approach help you minimize redundancies and increase the resilience? What we have been observing in a lot of companies today.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Shavik. Thanks again for having me and all of us here together to discuss this important topic. In the way the cloud's been evolving or has evolved over the past 5 or 6 years,
Mhm.
multi-cloud has become a reality. It's no longer if and when and so on, and especially so I would think in manufacturing, because manufacturing companies are not some organizations that have just come about in the last decade or so. They've been around for, especially even in India, right, over 40, 50, or even beyond that years, decades now, which means there's a lot of evolution that they have gone through in terms of their own business. Of course, their own IT infrastructure, the business infrastructure, both IT and OT, that has come to a point now where they're also thinking about using what Vivek was describing, AI and Gen AI and so on. So it's not a point I'm making is it's not a new thing for them to manage their business using technology, right? Although the levers they have today are a lot more powerful, and hence I would think multi-cloud starts to play a role. There are multiple drivers, Shomik, I would say, when you look at multi-cloud.
Mhm.
One is there legacy? Do I already have provider and there is a specific capability or a service that I think another provider might offer where it makes sense to combine the two? So you're looking at what, typically you would call best of breed, right? So I don't have to, today, the way the applications are structured, the way processes are getting structured, I don't necessarily have to be, locked into a provider just because I took a decision on that early on, right? So is there a specific capability or service that I think I will benefit? So multi-cloud helps, drive a lot of that thinking. Many times organizations have a preference, right? To say that, this is a cloud provider I've started with and I might want to stay on. And even
Mhm.
though there might be compelling reasons for organizations to start look at this best of breed, there may be some friction points. But how do we make customers aware from an architectural perspective that there is value in doing that? You're not compromising on anything. There's only value addition to the way you're going to get out of it. So that's one thing. The other thing is about cost. I think that's a very important aspect too. How do you balance cost? You've got investment done in a specific provider, but you can manage cost if you have it effectively managed across multiple calls. So there are multiple such drivers, right? Like I'm saying, specific capability. Is there a preference? Is there a cost element to it? And is there a regulatory environment that kind of enforces you to look at multi-cloud? If you're a global organization having operations in multiple countries, and there is a specific region where only a specific cloud provider today has an offering, you should not say, I will not go ahead because it's not the cloud provider that I've got, right? So, is regulatory requirements playing a role? All of that. There are things like, just to quickly conclude on this point, acquisitions. In the manufacturing space, there's a lot of M&A activity that happens. You acquire a company that might be running on another cloud provider, and you don't necessarily need to force them to migrate because that's a big journey in itself and a big decision in itself, and there is a coexistence that happens. There are challenges as well, which we'll talk about as we go through the discussion, but there are inherent drivers, there's inherent value, and like I'm saying, it's really a reality today. It's not really something that is not happening at all. To your point about resiliency, I think that's a very important point too. In the early days of cloud, when I say early cloud, I'm talking about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, multi-cloud was looked at to for resiliency from a disaster recovery perspective. So if I've got cloud provider that I'm working with, I might choose another cloud provider from a DR point of view. Again, there are technical implications, there are cost implications, but at least it sounds something that can be feasible. So resiliency was one of the key drivers, Shamik, but I would say it's not the only driver.
Right.
There are lots of other factors, and as I'm saying, it's become more like a reality now. We can talk about scenarios where it's really good to do. There are some scenarios where we would not suggest either. So you look at the current environment the customer operates in. But in general, it is a reality, as I would say, Shami.
Got it. Got it. Understood, Rajesh. Thanks. Now, let me rope in the man. who has been spreading the joy of technology for over 20 years now. Abdul Muneem, co-founder, director of Brio Technologies. Now, Abdul, a lot of companies are now turning towards AI and Gen AI to drive innovation and also process automation. Spread some joy among the attendees as well and tell us about the role of multi-cloud in this transition.
Hey, hi, Shamik. Thanks for having me. And I think really as we see from Prio's point of view, last we started almost working with Google 15 years back. So it's a 15-year partnership. And all these 15 years we've been in cloud. And from our business point of view, we feel like next 2 years, 3 years is the time where we have to sort of become AI enablers for our customers to help them bring the right, AI so that they can really make them, IT as a business differentiator. And if you're not doing that, I think it is a serious threat for our existence. So AI is here to stay, and it's a marathon. It's going to be another, a long run for AI. So, and we're working with many enterprises as well to see how they can sort of leverage AI and particularly Gen AI. What we have seen before I come to the advantage of multi-cloud, I think people are talking about AI and Gen AI. Vivek has talked in detail. So I think uh, speaking after Vivek is little difficult. You become repetitive. So we see people sort of focusing on demand forecasting, predictive maintenance, supply chain optimization, particularly on process automation. And as the voice becomes the new UI for all the applications, like there's a huge opportunity that businesses are seeing, particularly helping people on the floor, helping people on the field, using their voice to sort of find the right information, right data without having the defined skill sets. Like as Vivek was sort of highlighting in the demo, like how you'll be able to reach out to the root cause without much help required on your own. And what we see is different clouds have different strengths in different areas. So it becomes very important for businesses to get ready with all the clouds to leverage what's best with each and every cloud service provider. And I think yesterday also I was just sort of having a mail from my colleague saying, hey, this particular model does pretty well, uh, with this particular service provider and all these things. So I feel like now we are very lucky to be in a time where we have the privilege of choosing things over others. So and having multiple choices can also be a little challenging because you need to make the right decisions. Particularly we being a partner, what we see is most of the cloud service providers are having some very encouraging programs for businesses to start experimenting on AI. There's a lot of programs which can help you fund on your POCs and pilots. So I see one of the best advantage of being multi-cloud is like you get those benefits from multiple clouds. Like let's say you want to do four things, you can try to do like things on multiple cloud and get those benefits first thing from financing your POCs and stuff like that. And most importantly, getting expert advice because all the cloud service providers have the best people with them who can help you. So
Right.
you're also getting access to the best advice and it is coming, with your some commitments. You don't have to make significant, commercial commitments to start with. So I think these are some of the advantages if you see working with multi-cloud. And sometimes I see it is not a choice, it is a compulsion, because I was just meeting a large enterprise who is into reality,
Mm-hmm.
and they use a system from a particular service provider, building management system. And that building management system is sort of designed for a particular cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to use that. And we work with a lot of digital natives or companies who are sort of building technology. So what we see is, they have designed the whole system for a particular cloud. And particularly in the enterprise space, we see, when they go and talk to the customers, even though uh, the business wants that solution to be implemented, and this can make a huge impact on their business, because that other cloud is not compliant with their security, or it does not have a approval. They have to wait like for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months to get it approved. So our advice would be like, you know, I think all the businesses have to make sure like they are ready with all the clouds, so that they can start using anything from any cloud, and see that the business is priority and time to market is priority.
Right, right. Covered a lot of ground, Abdul, and thank you so much for those points. Rajesh, I want to get your input as well, please. You've been working with a lot of companies, a lot of manufacturers as well. Traditionally, the manufacturing industry has been a little slow in adopting the latest technologies, but with Gen AI, we have seen them, jumping onto the bandwagon real quick. Uh, what can you tell us about, how are these manufacturers leveraging AI, Gen AI, and can multi-cloud help them, propel that journey a little faster?
No, absolutely. I think continuing on what Abdul was just saying, right? I mean, there are various use cases. We've spoken about enough of it, so I, don't want to talk about the use cases again. Whether it's about as a collaborator for discovery, summarization, automation as well, or things like equipment service, plant operations, a manufacturing agent that Vivek spoke about earlier. There are Q&A, just basic Q&A, and then of course making them more customer oriented, dealer oriented, distributor oriented, supply chain. There's tons and tons of stuff we can talk about. And that's
Mhm.
AI is enabling that in an effective manner. Now, while you're doing all of that, and again, as I said, continuing what Abdul was saying, you should not be restricted by what you've already got as an investment or what a cloud provider provides. With the
Mhm.
API-based access to a lot of these models, including Google Gemini or the open source models or third-party models, right? You don't have to worry about where they reside. To you, it's an API call. You're calling an API, you're making it part of the workflow of your process, and making it as part of the way you want to see an outcome come to life, right? So it doesn't matter where it resides is the first thing I would say. So that mindset
Mhm.
about it's not on my provider and somewhere else, that has to go, right? You have to get the innovation thing out there no matter where it is. The second thing I would say is that, those organizations who are not necessarily just using the APIs, but are doing their own training and inferencing of their models. So there are various in manufacturing, not too many organizations would do that, but there are some who would. We're doing a lot of cutting edge R&D. We're doing simulations, right? Doing high performance computing and stuff like that, where they would end up using GPUs or Google's TPUs for that matter, right?
Right.
For all of these really capabilities, right? There again, uh, it really doesn't matter where it resides. If I'm doing training and inferencing and I need a GPU, pick it up where it's best available to you, whether it's cloud A provider or cloud B provider, because you're using that core service from there, and then again bringing it back into one single process. So, and of course, we know capacity for GPUs has been a challenge in the last
True.
quarters now, and multi-cloud allows you to give you the freedom to choose wherever it resides. So that I'm thinking manufacturing companies are starting to use as well. There are benefits of using a managed GPU environment as well, because then you have the orchestration layer, you have the management layer, the all the controls that you can build in, all of that, right? So AI is essentially kind of breaking free, allowing organizations to break free from what they have and use the best of what any of the cloud providers have to offer, whether it's API based access, whether it's GPUs, or whether it's even now the whole agent based architecture that's emerging, right? I should not be constrained by where it's being delivered from. So those are some of the things we're seeing more and more, Shravan.
Got it. Got it. Thank you for that, Rajesh. time to bring in Sundar into the discussion. Sundar Pelapur, he's the Customer Engineering Manager at Google Cloud India. Now, Sundar, I've got the perfect question for you. Because Sundar here is a man who believes that simplicity and use of technology are key to achieving goals. Now, we know what the goals are for the manufacturing industry. However, integrating these workloads across multiple clouds can be a complex and challenging affair. Um, how can you simplify this for your customers, and what best practices would you recommend?
Interesting question, Shamik. And I do believe that, using technology to help achieve our goals is the best way to move forward. And Rajesh alluded to a very interesting point when he started off saying, organizations that we typically work with have been around for far longer than we have, right? The innovation cycles, the journeys that they've taken to adopting applications and serving their users have been far longer, right? So you must recognize that a multi-cloud approach essentially allows you to unlock far better opportunities to their customers, not just the cloud service providers themselves. So I would break this down into two tasks and three pillars, right? Now, when adopting multi-cloud, tasks that you must worry about are how do you get highly standardized and controlled integration between different clouds and different applications that reside on these clouds, right? You
Mhm.
can expect to invest a certain amount to do just this portion, right? The other portion is essentially the other task is customer specific integrations, right? Here you would, spend some time and effort, not necessarily money, but both of these in working with the cloud service providers, native support teams, and experts who would give you that know-how how to work with them, right?
Mhm.
Let me come back to the pillars of, how do you adopt multi-cloud and what are the strategies that you must look at going forward. I would break them down technically into three things. Uh, Two being tech, one being people, because people again are the center of what we do. The first pillar is essentially the landing zone, the ingress point and the egress point of all the users in the applications, right? So whether it's identity and access management, whether it's how do you look at spinning resources, etc., right? Across these different teams. And of course, when you start using those resources, how do you worry about cost control? How do you worry about automation, so on and so forth?
Right.
A second pillar is architecture and governance, where before you start this journey, right? Of course, you'll never be at point zero where you're starting afresh, right? And
Mhm.
I mentioned that they're all on some stage of maturity or the other. It's important to create a blueprint and governance mechanism when you take on a multi-cloud approach. So a blueprint will define what goes where, which resources they're going to spin up on which clouds. What are the capabilities of those clouds that you're going to use? Rajesh alluded to the point earlier where we talked about using GPUs wherever they are today, right? But certain specific tasks about using, capabilities that Vivek showed earlier, right? Using Gemini, for instance, these things are available in Google Cloud, managed GPUs, so on and so forth. So a governance mechanism that states these are the capabilities of cloud A versus cloud B is something that I'm going to use. And the CIO and their organization can take a decision and create this governance mechanism, right?
Right.
So that's something that's very important. The third portion essentially is about people, where how do I upskill my team to take the best, of all of these clouds, bring them together so I can serve my users better, right? So now, that's essentially to do with do I have the necessary skills and the certifications? Am I working with the right partners, right? Who have those
Mhm.
skills with them? Am I, bringing in the capabilities that best suit my users? So essentially, I look at these three, and we can, deep dive on any of them. But essentially, I would break them down into two tasks, three pillars across using multi-cloud and sort of de-risking, your exposure to your users.
Got it. Got it. Thank you for that. Abdul, I would want to bring you into the conversation again. Again, one of the most pertinent topics that a lot of manufacturing companies are talking about today is, of course, cybersecurity. You've seen recent incidents as well. Some of the biggest manufacturers, we had Renault, Nissan, we had Toyota, and of course, Honda, and all of these were, global operations which were impacted for quite some time. What do you think are the security risks stemming from a multi-cloud environment, and what best practices would you recommend to your customers?
Um, I think it's a very pertinent uh, topic, and it's an area where like people or everyone is on the toes. But if you see CIOs, CISOs, for them, like I think how they can make security a business enabler, because usually with security coming in, like, people see, like, it's a disabler, like, people have to put a lot of efforts and it will delay things. But
Right.
how security can become a business enabler is one priority, a challenge. And how do they simplify it and make it more proactive? And most importantly, with AI being used, how AI can be leveraged in security, and they can automate. So these are some of the challenges, I think, which CISOs particularly have today. And all these are for, like, seeing how do they show the ROI for having the security, how do they close the security gaps, how do they gain the visibility on all the resources which they have across the clouds, and of course, like, how do they stay ahead of their adversaries. So from our point of view, like, even though if you are on a single cloud planning for a multi-cloud, of course, multi-cloud would sort of make things more complex for you, because different clouds have different configurations, different policies. It could be skill set of the teams, to sort of really understand all the clouds and implement. Uh, and of course, well, these are some of the challenges which, and the surface attack area also increases. So all these things little complex, but I don't think it is like proportional to the number of clouds which you are using. If
Mhm.
I think if you have a good governance and good policy, central policies to manage a single cloud. Let's say you're just using a single cloud, I think you can easily sort of take those things to the another cloud, and let's say you have something established for two clouds, then it becomes much more easier for the third cloud. So not like a very daunting thing, but I think uh, the fundamental rule should be like start secure and stay secure. So that is what we sort of uh, try to evangelize with the customers, because starting secure is very important. And definitely, not starting secure can lead to a huge technical debt down the line for you.
Correct.
So I think the best things would be to have the right central governance thing. And the good thing with today's times is the tools are maturing. Like, if you take an example of Google's Securities Command Center for Enterprise, which
Mhm.
is an amalgamation of, threat intelligence from mandiant, your posture management, your response, and on top of it, like, using generative AI, like, it's sprinkled with Gen AI to sort of automate things for you. So, and this can be used across the cloud. So,
Mhm.
I think, these CNAP tools and, your cloud workload posture management tools are maturing well, and, they have to be used fully. Of course, whatever is required for a basic cloud security point of view, like how do you manage your IFs, what are your policies to, uh, you know, uh, give access to the resources, all these things matter. But end of the day, I think if you're taking the right approach with the right partner, and enabling your team can really help you sort of cut down the technical debt which you carry currently.
Right. Understood. Sundar, Rajesh, you can feel free to chip in with your points as well. He rightly pointed out the multi-cloud, you're dealing with a lot of issues, especially the manufacturing sector. You've got dated ICS systems that are loaded with vulnerabilities. You have an explosion in the number of endpoints, and also a lot of incidents due to cloud misconfigurations. What are your thoughts around this, Rajesh and Sundar? Does multi-cloud mean amplified security risk, or can it actually be contained?
Why don't you go ahead, Sundar? I'll
Sure.
thanks.
In a way, Samik, it does increase our footprint because now
Mhm.
users have grown beyond our ideal data center boundaries that were there before.
True.
When you move to the cloud, attack surface increases in terms of number of applications, users connecting from multiple different endpoints as well, right? So then we have the geographically distributed, nature of the cloud as well. So, of course, Abdul mentioned start secure and stay secure. I think couldn't have summed it up better.
Mhm.
With a number of devices connecting to the cloud or to our applications, essentially, wherever they may be running, of course, it's all the more important for us to worry about securing those assets, especially in the manufacturing scenario, securing operational technology assets, the OT assets, becomes very, very important because any attack could essentially take down your operations, right? And I mean, from a manufacturing
Instantly.
standpoint, lead to huge losses. Essentially, how you're safeguarding your IT and OT environments is a new challenge that's presented to us in a new connected manufacturing world that Vivek showed us earlier. And this is reality today. This is not with something that's going to come up in the future. We already see an explosion in the amount of connected devices in the shop floor itself. Right, SCADA has
Mhm.
been there for a while, but now that it's getting connected to our IT systems, any vulnerabilities that may be encountered in IT systems could potentially lead to disruptions in your OT systems as well. So
That's
attack
very true.
surfaces have increased. So it's
Mhm.
definitely something that, and I talked about this before, you have to have your architectural blueprints in place that include security as a key point that you discuss when designing for a multi-cloud approach.
Right? That entire shift, left movement, and yeah, thanks for again highlighting that, Sundar. We now get to the most important part of the conversation because any IT deployment, the conversation begins and ends with ROI. That's the underlying conversation and both of your IT adoptions. So Rajesh, I would want to take your inputs on this. What would you say off the top of your head? What are three must dos for CIOs to drive cost optimization in multi-cloud operations?
Yeah. So before we go there, one thing that, while we were discussing occurred to me, we're talking multi-cloud in the context of cloud provider A versus B. But
Yeah.
when you think about manufacturing setups and they have factories and shop floors in remote locations as well, where you don't have maybe a good connectivity, you also have a self-sufficient disconnected cloud environment as well that they have. And Google, in fact, has a very strong offering around that, which is called Disconnect GDC, Google Disconnected Cloud, which allows you to have, let's say, a cloud which is only for a factory. You're only syncing to the main cloud on a need basis, but all your operations are happening within there too, right? You start to think about how all of these things work together on cloud providers, but also in a disconnected cloud environment, either at the edge or in a hybrid mode that you operate in, right? That's becoming very important too. So
Right.
organizations have to think about those elements as well. Now, when it comes to the whole management around cost and ROI and so on, one of the key things that I think CIOs are starting to do, or think when they, like I said, multi-cloud is a reality. So you have to think about how do I deal with security, how do I deal with skills that we spoke about earlier, how do we think about services and so on. But you start to think about deploying infrastructure as a code. So infrastructure as a
Mhm.
code has become popular. It's been around for a while now, but you actually use it in a proper manner, irrespective of where I deploy a virtual machine or a service or a managed service. I'm not
Mhm.
necessarily going in to the console and saying start a VM or start a GKE or a Kubernetes environment or start a data environment and so on. You've got infrastructure as a code, which means you're standardizing. You're standardizing how you spin up provision resources, how you deprovision resources, and you're making it a lot more process oriented. And then once you do infrastructure as a code, it doesn't really matter what is the endpoint at the back, right? You are running it through a virtualized or I would say an abstract layer infrastructure as a code that helps you manage the overall environment better and also control costs in an effective manner. The second thing is about configuring budgets and triggering alerts. Now, this actually is applicable irrespective of whether you use single cloud, multi-cloud, or a hybrid cloud, or a disconnected cloud. Organizations have to start doing that. You have to start configuring budgets and alerts and trigger warnings. If somebody runs a runaway query in the data environment, and we've seen that happen, it can have a huge bill of consequence, right? How do you manage that? And more so in a multi-cloud environment, how do you configure those budgets and controls? So I think that's the second thing I would say. Third would be, kind of doing an ongoing operational aspect about looking at your billing, exporting them to a data environment, creating a view for the whole FinOps, right? We haven't spoken about FinOps enough. That becomes extremely important too when you look at a cloud environment too. How do I start to not only manage my costs, but optimize it in a multi-cloud environment? That's a very important element too, right? So those are three or four things that come to mind. So, I mean, there's a lot more, but at least these are, I think, key points.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Sundar, if you could weigh in with your thoughts as well. keeping bearing in mind the fact that cloud costs are rising. Some projections are that there's a 3.7% year-on-year rise. We're seeing a lot of cloud repatriations or cloud reverse migrations as well. What would you suggest to customers? How do they get the most bang for their buck when it comes to multi-cloud operations, multi-cloud deployments?
Great question, Sumit. And my take is happy CIO is always backed by a FinOps team, right? And there may be, just few people in the organization who are working with, spokes from their respective CSPs, cloud service providers. But wherever customers have taken conscious calls of how do I protect my investment in terms of runaway situations, right? There may be a crisis that leads to a restoration that sends you a huge bill. I mean, no cloud service provider likes to send large bills to customers, right? It's about predictability. Test often, right? Be aware of the services that you're using. Hence I'm harping on the point where architectural governance and good practices need to be set up well in advance. You
Right.
also need to test for certain amount of scenarios routinely, and the people element cannot be stressed upon hard enough, because your people have to understand, if you're using, let's say, a serverless platform like Rajesh mentioned, what is the expected cost I want to reach with a certain amount of load that I'm running today, right? If I'm standardizing, am I testing enough to say, am I bringing in different components of the architecture to ensure that I stay within the guardrails, right? And the last portion is, of course, every cloud service provider has billing alerting mechanisms to ensure that you're not surprised at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, right?
Right.
Um, so we implore our customers to use these best practices. But see, with elasticity and flexibility comes great responsibility, right? You
Mhm.
can have a cloud that can scale infinitely, but of course, there's going to be consequences from a cost standpoint. So it's
Right.
important to test often, skill up people, and ensure that you use all the services that the CSPs have to control this big element called cost.
Mhm. Correct. Correct. Thank you for that, Sundar. Uh, Again, continuing with the uh, conversation on cost, I would want to get Abdul into the conversation. Now, Abdul, while you were talking with us in your discussion points, you brought up the topic of TCO and technical debt a lot of times. A lot of CIOs today are worried about accruing technical debt. What would be your message to the CIOs? How can they ensure that their multi-cloud environments does not lead to accruing more technical debt?
Yeah, I think uh, I would just try to sort of highlight certain areas which could sort of lead to technical debt.
Mhm.
And one first area Sundar was sort of mentioning, like, start right with the right foundation. So sometimes when we're working with our customers, it's a very small project, and why do you take so much time? Because I think wherever an organization is starting with a new cloud, I think they need to pay ample attention to have the right foundation. If that foundation is not right, then of course you can get started, but later on it's going to come and haunt you in a much bigger way. So
Mhm.
uh, that is one area I think where people should sort of pay attention. Second area is how do you do things, and Rajesh was rightly pointing towards ISEs. Review. Basically, ISEs sort of help you document things in a way which are understandable to everyone, like, hey, what you're doing, why you're doing, and just in case something goes wrong, you have the scripts to rerun them rather than manually configuring and uh, leading to some errors and stuff like that. So how do you do things is very important. uh, and then, like, sort of utilizing the resources. How are you utilizing? Because usually what happens is, like, when people are in development, they have few things, and they carry on, and they forget to sort of roll back those things later on, and they keep running. And this happened to me. Like, I was doing some integrations with HubSpot, and
Mhm.
the system integrators which are there in Google Cloud, I just left them open, and I ended up paying 2 lakhs for 3 months.
Oh my
So
God.
like later on. So I think it's very important to sort of have see an eye and have an eye on what you're doing for your projects. And third, and one more area is how do you become vendor or cloud agnostic is very important. Like what technologies you are choosing, and that can really help you. It's like taking the opportunity of today to plan for tomorrow. So this is one philosophy I think we should have embedded in all our thoughts and processes to stay and minimize. And of course, it's striking a right balance between now and for the future. It's We don't want businesses to sort of overthink about future and start losing the opportunity of today. So it has to be in perfect balance. Like how do you do that? I think implementation is one area where people should really focus out of all our projects. I'll give you an example of one large enterprise with which we are working on an
Okay.
IoT use case.
Hmm.
The whole solution that was built by uh, a service provider, which was not documented. And this is a lifeline, that particular business. It takes the data of all the plants and gives them some dashboards in which all the decisions are made. And the whole system is a black box for them because they don't know what is happening, how it is happening. They only know how to use it. And
Right.
that is a black box for them. So there's no documentation. And it took almost 1.5 years for us because the customer is not able to explain why it is, what it is. So you have to understand everything, then go and sit with the business decision makers and validate your learnings. And
Hmm.
it is such a painful uh, thing. And let's say if the system breaks in between, it becomes, it can have a huge financial impact on the business itself. So these are some of the things which we sort of see, to sort of, achieve your business goals. You tend to overlook these things. They're fine to an extent, but they cannot be ignored altogether. So I think, be it a single cloud or multi-cloud, I think, uh, you know, uh, businesses have to see that they have a governance which will audit these things. Like there should be a technical depth audit which is carried out by the team in all the areas which I was sort of mentioning, and there are many more areas. I cannot cover them all, but I think doing this can really help minimize the impact of the technical depth in the future.
All right. All right. Thank you for sharing those points.
And
Rajesh, yeah,
one
sorry.
I just want
Go
to
ahead. Go ahead.
point to the previous question on the cost optimization. Sorry for taking that.
No problem. No problem. Go on.
I have a different perspective because see, there are different levers to sort of optimize your cost. First is like Rajesh and Sundar have one and two. They have sort of really talked about how you can do like how you can do FinOps and how you can do. Those are very critical. But I think if you reach that stage and we see our customers, lots of customers have reached that stage. So what is left for them? So another there's another lever of working on some financial commits with the cloud service providers because that can also give you a good leeway to sort of optimize your cost. Uh, and what we have seen is uh, businesses are either very optimistic in sort of projecting their spend and overcommit and suffer in the future not meeting their commitments. And what really worries about us is there are some customers who sort of undercommit what they're spending. Like let's say I have a capacity of spending 500K in a year, but I, being very pessimistic, I just committed 200. So I got a benefit because I've just committed for 200 and
Mhm.
just lost an opportunity of another 300K, which I could have got. So it has to be, you have to be cautious. We are not suggesting customers to be, optimistic and go ahead and give large commitments. But I think they also understand, and there's a uh, you know value that is on the right there on their table to sort of leverage and optimize. And because there's a multi-cloud discussion, I think exploring other clouds can also give you that significant benefit. Like let's say you're using X cloud and you are interested in exploring Y cloud. Y cloud may be more interested and and pay more attention and give you more benefits end of the day. So
Okay.
this is one aspect of.
All right, all right. Very relevant points that you brought up there. Thank you for that. Rajesh, if you could weigh in with your thoughts as well. We as a community, we pride ourselves on our, jugaad skills. A lot of times, we work under pressure, so there's inadequate code review. Like Abdul pointed out, there's inadequate documentation. All of this actually leads to accruing a lot of technical debt.
Yeah.
What are some of these solutions that come to your mind? What would you want to
No, I
advise here?
think a lot of it has already been discussed. It's about ensuring that while you are tech debt is there even in a single cloud environment, but when you move to multiple clouds, how are you addressing that? So, for example, do you have duplicated code bases? Are you creating duplicate data because you've spun up another instance? Now you have multiple copies of the data, so you don't want to be in that situation. You don't have multiple copies of the code. You don't have a process that is just one of the key things that a lot of people organizations are concerned when they use in a multi-cloud environment is latency. I'm going to communicate with
Mhm.
cloud A and B. Is there latency enough? And hence they start creating duplicate copies of the data to avoid that latency. But that leads to tech debt in the future. And that problem in a way has been addressed. Like just to address that point, right? Inter-cloud communication, we call cross-cloud interconnect, is a reality today. That means you can have GCP and another cloud provider using a very strong high capacity pipe between the public cloud providers, which means you don't need to maintain the duplicate copies anymore, right? When you're
Right.
thinking about databases, right, and you're trying to create a completely multi-consistent database which is spread across regions, maybe across countries, and then again you start to create multiple copies. How do you avoid that? So tech debt is also as a result, in my view, because of the limitations earlier that existed in working in a multi-cloud environment, latency, egress cost, the whole operational overhead that comes to mind, right? Those issues now have been addressed, which
Right.
means because if you're addressing the basic foundational problems, the ability to accumulate tech debt comes down automatically because you don't have to worry about things which you had to worry about even maybe a year, earlier. I
True.
think having good understanding of what has happened in the past year or so in ensuring that multi-cloud works in a seamless manner, automatically the developers and the app providers will start to leverage that in an effective manner, keeping those in mind, and hence the tech debt comes down in my mind. In addition to the points that Sundar and Abdul has already spoken.
All right, all right. I think we've got time enough to squeeze in a couple of questions we got from the attendees.
Sure.
I'm going to, just throw it out to the house. Any of you can actually take it. The first one comes in from Akash Bhargav, who's asking, how can a multi-cloud approach help MSMEs employed in the manufacturing business scale their business? So, multi-cloud as a tool to scaling. Um any of you can take a dig at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go and then maybe Abdul, so that you can add too. I mean, MSMEs, and I think some points we already spoke about. In fact, running in a multi-cloud environment might give you leverage from a cost element point of view. So you can actually have kind of create competition of sorts, I would say, that allows you to get the best outcome from a pricing perspective. That apart, I would also say the ability to scale is, as I was saying, if there are, if an MSME wants to launch in different countries or regions, you have the ability to, spin up very, very quickly where that cloud provider might exist and what you might have may not already have. So I think that, so cost benefit, ability to move into a new region or new geo in a much quicker fashion. Third is use it for bursting capacity. And I've seen that too, right? So you might be using your primary provider, but in case of burst workloads where you believe that you need capacity running spot instances or preemptive instances and so on another provider, because spot and preemptive are available only when there is excess capacity on what you are currently using. If you're able to
Right.
leverage the other provider for those kind of leverage for bursting that again allows you to scale much faster. So those are some initial thoughts that come to mind. I don't know, Sundar, Abdul, you want to add anything?
Yeah, Rajesh, rightly said. I think both from the cost lever,
Mhm.
also uh, the services that exist on these schemes, right? Do what's best for you because uh, see, MSMEs have a constraint in terms of amount that they can spend on technology because their main focus is business, right?
Mm.
So
Right.
do the best because you can have both the cost levers adjusted to what you can spend and derive the best capabilities that each cloud offers, right? So GCP has its native strengths, so do other providers, right? So you've got to recognize that and say, use what's best for you. I think this is the right way to approaching multi-cloud for an MSME with, a lot of headroom to grow in the future. And once you mature to a certain extent, then you can start to bring in the elements that I talked about earlier, use elements of FinOps, cost optimization, architectural blueprints, and that's how, you tend to grow. It's
Mhm.
important to keep in mind not to accrue significant technical debt that prevents you from growing. So you shouldn't do that at a point where now you're not an MSME anymore, but your tech is restricting you to do certain things.
Right.
It's a fine balance. Of course, getting it right is not that difficult anymore, like Rajesh pointed.
Understood. Understood.
Uh,
Um,
Just
Go ahead, please.
one point here. I think primary thing is in the multi-cloud approach, like everyone has to define the objective of why you want to have a multi-cloud. It's not like you need to have a multi-cloud approach, like until and unless there's a very compelling reason to have that. Like we see a couple of customers who are very heavily on one cloud, but using Google Cloud, particularly for data and AI, because they have a very compelling reason. And if you go and talk to them, like they say, hey, uh, the sort of simplicity, the power of simplicity, as Sundar like was mentioning, he believes in the simplicity. So the power of simplicity which they experience on Google Cloud or Google products, particularly on data and AI, uh, they don't get or see it on the other cloud service providers. So we are all good with our infra on one cloud, but we are good. So we have customers who've been using just BigQuery and AI services. So what I mean to say is like if you have a compelling reason to sort of use multiple clouds, then do it. But if you don't have a compelling reason or it's not aligning with your objectives, it's better to stay on single.
Correct. Correct. All right. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground there, a lot of aspects of multi-cloud operations. Thank you so much for sharing your inputs with us, gentlemen. And attendees, thank you so much for your interest and also sharing your questions. Again, there was Abdul Muneem, Rajesh Shivani, and Sundar Pelapur. That's the team from Google Cloud, and Muneem from Abdul from Brick Technologies. So thanks again, and thanks for joining us. You guys have a great day ahead. Until next time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Amit.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
It was great learning. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Absolutely. Thanks. Bye bye.